Good evening and welcome to The Big Picture. We will take a closer look at one of the top stories of the day. This evening, we're focusing on Greece. A month after he resigned from his post as Prime Minister, a jubilant Alexis Tsipras declared victory in Greece's snap elections. He claimed a clear mandate, but with just 35.5% of the votes, his party Syriza will be joining hands with the right-wing independent Greeks to form a coalition government. But will this be the answer to the Greeks' hope of sustainability? Well, to help us answer that, we have an esteemed panel here. We've got Mr. Dr. Praveen, in fact, Professor at JNU, joining us in studio. We've also got Economist Aakash Jindal here in studio with us. And also joining us from the capital, we've got former member of the IMF and the RBI, Ms. Renu Kohli as well. Professor, if I could start with you, the very fact that this is the same Prime Minister who rolled out all those extensive bailout plans, who, made out all those reforms, which, of course, it was putting out to be that Greeks were not, of course, happy with those. But he's back into power. What does this mean, this vote?
You see, all those difficult dimensions of his bailout plan were obviously, if you look at the campaign, for very good reasons, were played down very considerably. Tsipras didn't really talk about all those difficult dimensions, etc. And he rather focused on how to soften the blow and what can be done and so on and so forth. So that is something which obviously played an important role. But in a sense, I think the Greek population was looking at Tsipras as the best of the worst. I think that's how I would like to...
Caught within the devil and the sea.
Exactly.
There was not much here.
So this mandate in some sense is essentially that. Because his earlier stance and what brought Syriza to power in the first place was a very strong opposition to this entire austerity program and so on. And in spite of that referendum which backed Syriza and Tsipras very powerfully, he actually went back on that. Nonetheless, if Greeks have decided to give him a second chance, clearly they're thinking of him as possibly, given the circumstances, the best of the possible kind of contender to maybe steer the situation, the economy in a manner which might be tolerable or something like that. So, apart from being a kind of small positive support and mandate in favor of Syriza and Tsipras, it's also probably echoing a sense of helplessness with what could be the other alternatives. For instance, there was this feeling that those who broke away from Syriza, the more radical left-wing options, which was represented by a number of very key figures in the earlier government, including the ex-finance minister and so on. But somehow they could not even get entry into the parliament. So clearly, somewhere, this is a kind of dichotomy which we need to understand. There is strong support, strong kind of mandate for a certain kind of political, but you are not even willing to support those people to come to the parliament. So we have to make sense of all that, and simultaneously there is also a kind of some fatigue. The voting percentage has come down from 63
he has
to
in fact lost seats compared to the previous
He has lost seats a little bit. The extent of support which has gone to the more right-wing kind of parties and so on, Golden Dawn in particular, all these are worrisome things. In terms of vote percentage, this Golden Dawn, which is a neo-fascist party, is number 3. So there are all these contradictions within that polity and society, and in that, somehow the Greeks thought that, okay, this is the best bet. So make the worst situation look as some kind of tolerable one, and for that, possibly here is a person. And his personal popularity, again, is something which continues to be quite important.
We've in fact got senior journalist Priya also joining us on the panel this evening. We'll come to you, sir, of course, talking about the other challenges that Tsipras is going to be facing. But Aakash, if I could come to you, just talking about this lukewarm kind of a voting response that he has got, that's the kind of response that Tsipras or even this victory got on the markets as well. We didn't see much of a big swing on the Greek markets, or for that matter, even in our European markets.
I think you are very right. And if you ask me, in the current scenario, I never expected the market to react so wildly. I'll see. We have to see the situation. Now, there was a situation in January when Tsipras came to power. there was enthusiasm, there was euphoria that a new leader has come in. Firstly, he'll stop all those things which are against the expenditure. He would stop the move against austerity. This is what was required. And what he said was that I'll stop austerity. Number two, what he said was very interestingly that I'll make the economy grow. Thirdly, he said, I'll make Greece stay within the Eurozone. Now, first two things are contradictory. Now, in these times, in short term, you have to have austerity measures, then only can you recover. So these two things were contradictory and they were not bound to happen. And this is what happened. In the initial 8 months, first two things never happened. The only achievement was the third thing, that yes, he managed the country to stay within the Eurozone. Some credit goes to him and some credit goes to Eurozone because they wanted it to stay. Now, after 8 months, he has been voted back to power. I think now we have a more seasoned, experienced and maturer Tsipras.
Okay.
So now what I expect from is, now see the people as well as the leader, as well as other parties. Now, when other parties also, they went to elections, they said, we agree to bail out. So what I can understand is that now the country has come to terms that yes, some sort of austerity measures have to be adopted because in the bailout itself, it was that taxes would be increased.
That's right.
I mean, relief measures would be reduced. So now I think we would have a more milder version of this, and 1 month down the lane, there's a review also. So I think if you ask me as an economist, I have a habit of giving unsolicited suggestions. I'll do the same here also. So I'll give a suggestion to Mr. Tsipras as well as the people of Greece that in short term, austerity measures have to be taken. But it's a case like an accident has occurred and you are bleeding. So what do? You need first aid. You put a dressing to stop the bleeding. But austerity can't grow the economy. So in shorter term, you do austerity. In the longer term, you need to grow the economy. And this is what he needs to tell the people. That for short term, we do need to have some austerity. Ultimately, I'll make the economy grow so the people would also be relieved. And that way they can pay off the debt. And ultimately, we can see IMF also perhaps joining in case they see things comfortable.
So this is what you're bringing in the IMF picture. We've got Ms. Renu Kohli as well joining us, from the capital. Ms. Kohli, Greece, of course, has to pay 3.2 billion euros. I'm getting that number right. And it owes it to the IMF later this year. How is the IMF, how is the EU also seeing this victory?
Well, the responses haven't come in so far, to the best of my knowledge. But my sense is that the Greek Prime Minister, Alex Tsipras, has actually been, if you go back, evolve his trajectory from January onwards in these 8 months, he has tempered as a politician. Recall that he left, he came as a far left candidate. And very soon he shed them after going through prolonged talks with the EU leaders. So he parted company, he got rid of his far-left colleagues, and now there is a complete, the circle has turned full wheel, as it were, because he is going to be allying with the far-right independent coalition. So there is a bit of tempering. So my sense is that the European leaders will be much warmer to him. Also, the developments in the markets, there has been actually the Greek bond deals, that is the price at which the Greek sovereign can borrow from the market, the cost of its borrowing, have softened in the wake of this post-election outcome and the results. So that is a hallmark of confidence. Third, in the last 1 month, while the Greek voters themselves have got resigned to the economic hardship and have sort of accepted the inevitable, the fact is that there was so much of capital flow happening from the system that there is a real shortage of cash. But ever since the bailout contours were agreed between the Troika, the ECB, the EU leaders and the IMF, actually, for the last 1 month, in the month of August, capital outflow from Greece has actually got arrested. It has been net positive. So that also is another indication of confidence in Tsipras. He has evolved, he has tempered, he has become more realistic, as it were. So in balance, I would say that it sounds augurs positive. At least the reaction of the markets in terms of the softening of the bond yields definitely indicates that. As far as the IMF is concerned and the return or repayment of its loan, let us not forget that it was the IMF in a couple of months ago which sort of put its foot down, saying that unless there was a debt write-off and a complete restructuring plan, it wasn't going to be participating in this whole Greek bailout thing, because it was talking about that there have been two bailouts in the past several years, and nothing came of it. So IMF was the one who reinforced the point that there is an economy which simply, no matter how hard you flock it, no matter how much austerity you impose upon it, it's just not going to revive. So you have to face the reality, and you have to write off a substantial portion of the debt, to which the EU leaders eventually agreed. So, you know, those broad contours or boundaries of the bailout itself restored confidence, and capital outflow has arrested. The next step is now, of course, my sense is that Tsipras has become very realistic. So, you know, gone is the baggage or the trumpet on which he came to power in January, which was a impossible combination of no austerity and yet staying within the Eurozone. Perhaps now looking ahead, they might be able to devote themselves more to growth-inducing measures.
In fact, we are going to be talking about the economy, of course, and how it is one of the biggest challenges that, of course, Tsipras is facing. But Mr. Dash, we were also talking about how in this 1 month, ever since he resigned as a Prime Minister and now he's back, he's going to be back again as Prime Minister, there is one big problem as well that Greece is facing, which is, of course, the migrant crisis. And that is, of course, something that even, forget just Europe, even the whole world is going to be paying its attention to.
In that sense, Greece is a frontline state. It will be one of the first countries to bear the brunt of the migrants in their thousands now crossing over to Europe. Now, that's, of course, it's a good thing insofar as the long European economy is concerned, particularly Germany would need that kind of young and perhaps cheap labor. You know, in fact, several of the European economies with aged population would actually, this will be a blessing in disguise, but that for the immediate hassles and the difficulties that Greece is facing, the immigrants become an even bigger problem for the Prime Minister to handle.
Yes.
Now, the Greeks have been indecisive politically and economically quite confused. So, and even after this so-called decisive vote, you know, it's just that he's going to have a simple coalition with with the support of a far-right party. That's this kind of a result. You know, this election outcome could have been very, very bad. But so it's a saving grace. But despite this, you know, the kind of the tasks that the new government administration there faces, and it's been quite confused in the past. And it remains confused as to what exactly can be done, because you know, 3 bailout packages and the austerity, they are not working in terms of, you know, how do you make an economy get out of the trouble that it's in by practicing all kinds of austerity that are proposed to be done. Like you are required to raise taxes, cut pensions, you know, reform the public sector, capitalize the banks, do all kinds of things.
Exactly.
You know, when you are in no position to actually be going through this misery. And on top of it, now you have a immigration problem, and there are these thousands of migrants which would be.
Just on migration problem, it is of course EU problem as a whole, and of course, as Ranjan said, that Greece being one of the frontline states, right, being right next to Turkey,
Yes.
kind of becomes a conduit, a route, etc., and put some pressure on it. But coming back to the economy, you know, the first thing which my sense is one needs to understand is that the root cause of crisis itself, the prolonged crisis in Greece, needs to be understood by focusing on two things. One, very, very faulty kind of integration in EU itself. And in general, you know, this is true of many southern states, you know, Spain, Portugal, etc., are facing that problem, which is what? You know, any monetary union is not good enough in itself. For any union to be one union, it has also to focus on the fiscal side. Right? So unless there is sort of, you know, a sense of purpose with respect to fiscal policy in an Europe-wide sense, now this is one of the root causes of the problem. The second root cause, the major root cause, is not because Greeks were lazy or Greece was not doing its bit and so on. It's basically the neoliberal framework where who was fundamentally subsidized. It was a kind of financial oligarchy in Greece, and which then decided to run away with the money. Right? So it's not the debt of Greece per se, but it's the debt of a particular whatever. Then the third thing comes on top of all this, which is austerity. Now, even IMF took the view that austerity hasn't worked. It took the view that debt needs to be restructured and so on. But what does Tsipras do? He basically falls for the same bailout package, right? Where you're saying that, yes, we accept the austerity, the conditions were as bad, if not worse in some ways, right? What he's possibly hoping for is some renegotiation of some of these things, partly because even EU has softened in some ways.
Yes.
For instance, this provision that Greece's annual debt servicing costs at 15% of economic output over the long term. Right? Now, if that happens, clearly you are saying, okay, if there is no growth, then your debt servicing obligations will go down. Right? If it's a robust growth, then things can happen and so on and so forth. So, you know, Germany also has softened its stand vis-a-vis some of these provisions and so on. But fundamentally, we are talking of a terrible austerity package. Now, that package will result exactly in kind of outcomes which we saw earlier. You gave them 40 billion, you took away 38 billion, right?
But
now,
his survival, the very fact that he is back to power, does that give him some negotiating upper hand? Akash, if you could join in, does it give him a bit of an upper hand at least now?
Definitely, it definitely gives him, he'll be a much more confident person. Because see, we all know the circumstances he was in, how he negotiated, how he was sort of compelled by the circumstances to negotiate in July, how he left the power, but now he has been voted back. So I think we'll have a more confident leader now. So who thinks that yes, and who is right in thinking so that people think that he is the person who can deliver in spite of what has happened in the past 8 months. And as I said earlier, he would be a more seasoned man in the period of 8 months itself, because he has seen everything, all the lows, and of course one credit that he managed to stay with the help of EU in the EU. So the country never came out of EU. So that is what his achievement has been. So I think he'll be a more confident person, more milder person, more closer to reality. So that definitely would give him more decision-making power. Now again, the situation is not at all good. Election outcome is there, but the problems of Greece are far from over. They may be celebrating that elections outcome is there, somebody has been voted as a leader, but problems are far from over. 1 month down the lane, there would be a review of the bailout package. And again, I doubt going ahead, there could be a fourth bailout package also. But what happens is here, I have a slight difference of opinion from my learner friends.
Yeah, very quickly.
Initially, as of now in short term, yes, austerity is required. I'll put it that way, that now initially the bleeding has to be stopped. Once the bleeding is stopped, then to put the man back into action, the surgery has to be performed. But initially you have to give the first aid, you have to stop the bleeding. So this is what austerity is, to reduce the fiscal deficit. Plus, see the GDP growth, it has gone down by 29% in 6 years.
Yes.
So initially, some sort of sacrifice also, though it's not easy to be done, but now public also is, I think, more closer to reality in what has happened in the 8 months. That's why they have backed him.
I can see Professor Thakur was not.
You see, austerity will only increase the bleeding. If I use Akash's metaphor,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
This is not going to help in any kind of recovery, even in the short run.
Let me just bring in Mr. Dash as well.
I doubt. Initially, I think I'm very much of the view that bleeding has to be stopped prior to performance of a surgery. But this is what it's, and this is what the EU has also said.
But
Oh,
I
right.
I
Mr.
will
Dash,
not
yes.
do
What I'm
that.
saying is, I don't quite see that this election has brought about some kind of stability and the new government is going to embark on the task in right earnest without political difficulties. Let's not forget that this is the third election in 9 months and, sixth election in 5 years. Now, yes, Mr. Tsipras' party has been got rid of so many of his, extreme left colleagues, 1/3 of them, but there are perhaps another 1/3 within the party. He's still, and he has a laundry list of 60 things that he has to do. And in doing that, you see, the key to it is whether there is any relief at all, or it is just the bailout package and the austerity. Unless, he'll have to, of course, pursue the bailout package and the measures that are there. But, going forward, if he doesn't get any debt relief, which is actually aspiring to get, then he may again have this problem from within the coalition itself.
Yeah, we're running short of time. I'm going to give the last word to Ms. Renu Kohli. What do you think is the immediate challenge really that Tsipras is going to face? Do we see uncertainty still continuing and the Greeks out on the streets again? Yes.
Yeah, very quickly. The fact is that now with Tsipras' evolution and becoming more realistic, he will be able to deliver more in terms of promises on structural reforms. The debate so far that we've had on this discussion has focused more on austerity and write-off and bleeding, but there is always a kind of engagement that all the money, etc., because growth has to be using and new sources of competitiveness and productivity-enhancing measures have to be found. So my sense, I think that he will now be able to go ahead with things like commitment towards privatization, sale of state assets, and so on, to release, to make a greater space for private sector. And contrary to, what is commonly believed, it was, I think, widely irresponsible to fight an election on the basis of making promises such as austerity, no austerity, but sticking to the Eurozone, because politicians, when they make such commitments, ought to have remembered that the Greek government itself, of whatever hue in the past, had itself signed the Growth and Stability Pact, which binds the EU together, which also lays down the contours of fiscal policy, notwithstanding the monetary union. So there is a huge irresponsibility on the part of Greek governments in the past, and it is good that actually things have come and evolved in this way.
Okay.
So I think the structural reform aspect will now get some kind of a kick.
All right. All I can say is he's got another feather in his cap, but he's still walking that tightrope. I'm sorry, we're running out of
but
time.
let me just tell you, this is not a way forward, but this is the dead end. Unless the terms of the bailout are renegotiated.
Right.
Unless there is a significant loosening of the measure, austerity, etc., I do not see it as a way forward at all.
Let's see eventually what eventually
But,
happens.
There is one other thing. All the parties, they have supported, who went to election, they have supported the terms of the bailout. They have said that, yes, we agree to the terms of the bailout.
Perhaps he has a little lesser of a problem than he was facing about a month back.
It's been agreed upon already.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to all our guests, of course, for joining us on The Big Picture. Join us again tomorrow, of course, on another big issue. Thanks so much for joining us for today.